Hi guys, welcome to this week's discussion. And this week we are going to talk about some questions related to calculate the GDP and its components. So let's look at the first question. Into which category of aggregate expenditure would each of the following transaction falls? First one, the Smith family buys an electric car. B, the Riverside Public School District buys new desks for their classrooms. C, the Smith family buys a home that was recently constructed. D, Adam Smith orders an FC Barcelona jersey from an online site in Spain. E, McDonald's purchases 225 new iPads from Apple. Okay, so let's look at the options one by one. First one, if a family buys an electric car, what it would be conclude? It would be the consumption, because this is the final goods or services purchased by a household according to the definition of the consumption. And also option B buys a new desk for their classrooms. Actually, this is government expenditure because this is not belongs to the households, right? And according to the definition of government expenditures, goods and services that are government buys. And also this family buy a home that was recently constructed, and this would be considered to an investment, according to the definition again. And this family buys something from an online site in the Spain. This is actually the import because you are not buying goods. You are not buying goods and services from domestically. Goods and services bought in one country that was produced in another is considered to be the imports. And McDonald's purchased 225 new iPads from Apple. This is the investment because the goods and services purchased by a firm would be considered the investment. Okay. And second question, discuss the determinants of consumption spending. Do you think one determinant is more important than another? How does consumption spending change when there is a risk in stock prices or housing prices? So let's look at one by one. What's the determinants of consumption spending? First one, income or disposal income. Of course, if you can consume something, you need to have money, right? You need to have income. So the first one is the disposal income, where it is the income minus taxes. If you represent to the notations that we are familiar about, it would be Y minus T. And also the wealth. Of course, you cannot you can consume without income if you can have wealth. Okay, and the wealth is the total values of assets minus total value of liabilities, and also the interest rate. Because if you have the investment in the bank, you would be care about the interest rate because you can have the dividends. Low interest rates makes the purchasing a car cheaper if the car is being financed with a loan. And also the expectations. Even though you don't have the money at currently, but after graduation, you would have a job. Then you would have income, you would have wealth, then you would expect you will consume in the future. And it will place a significant role in the amount of spending by households. And also the preferences and tastes. This one we cannot measure in the microeconomics because everyone's preference and taste would be not the same. Okay, next question. Discuss that y equals AE. AE means aggregate expenditure is deep seating. Okay, and draw the line on the graph with the aggregate expenditure function. Where's the equilibrium? What is the slope of y equals to AE and AE line? You have a lot of questions. First one, we need to know what y equals to AE represents. Why? This is the same with the notation, the same with GDP, right? You can think y in your right on your right hand side, left hand side is output, and AE aggregate expenditure is the expenditure. So left hand side is the inflow and right hand side is the outflow. And when y equals AE, where we have the x-axis is y and y-axis is AE, so it means that it would be a 45-degree line, and this one would be fixed. And AE, aggregate expenditure, is actually a line that you need to calculate by using the real data. Then this interaction point is when y equals to AE. So every point on this 45-degree line would satisfy y equals to AE. And when we go to the real AE curve, then the E star here is actually the equilibrium. Okay, so this is the meaning of this figure. So here I'm using the equations for help us understanding the aggregate expenditure and the slope of it. And the slope is very important. We call it MPC, which is the marginal propensity to consume. Okay, so let's look at what is MPC. We know what's the component of AE, right? C and I and G and the next export, where we can represent C equals to AC and MPC times disposal income, where we divided the C to be the aggregate consumption and household consumption personally. And then if you can rewrite this equation, you can find that the coefficient of y is actually MPC. So that's why the slope of the AE line is the MPC, where y is the x-axis and marginal propensity score is the slope. And the y-intercept of AE is here. So actually you don't need to memorize it, because after getting the expression of the AE curve, then substitute when y equals to 0, you can get the intercept. So here, now you know what the MPC means, then how to get it. Remember, MPC is the AE line's slope, where when x-axis is y. Then how to get it? You only need to calculate the slope, right? How to get the slope? You need to find 2 points. When y is 5,000, C is 4,500, y is 6,000, C 250, then you can get the slope of it, where the denominator is the delta y and the numerator is delta c. Then you can get MPC means 0.75. So let's think, what is the economic meaning of this MPC? MPC means that after getting the 5,000, in this case, income, then you would use 75% to be your consumption. Okay, so this is the meaning of MPC. And what is the equilibrium real GDP? Remember how to get the equilibrium? You only need to let y equals AE. So when you get AE's expression, then just use AE equals to y. Where you know AE's expression is here, then let it equal to y. You can get the equilibrium GDP is 8,000. Okay, let's look at the next question. Suppose the rate of growth of the economic in Euro slows down and the US net export to fall by 100 billion. If you know the MPC is 0.9, what would be the change in the equilibrium US GDP? So here, after getting MPC, and you know there's a delta and X, right? Then how to get the equilibrium US GDP? Method 1, you need to let y equals to AE and then substitute the expression of AE after you know what is MPC. Then you can get delta y is actually 10 times something delta nx, which means that if the net export falls about 100 billion, then y, which means the GDP would decrease about 1000, which is 1000 billion. Okay, but there's an easier way for you to do this thing because it would be this one. You only need to use this coefficient to times the delta nx, where the coefficient is 1 over 1 minus MPC. So actually this method 2 is extracted, is the conclusion of method 1. If you don't have time during your exam, then you can just use method 2. You don't need to derive every step by using method 1, okay? And then let's do the practice. What is the equilibrium level of real GDP? Where you know this thing, right? And what is MPC? Remember, the basement would be always the figure that represents y equals AE. And suppose that the net exports decreases by 400, what would be the new equilibrium level of real GDP? So here, I will show you the answer and then you can practice by yourself. This is a good chance for you to practice it. You can make a screenshot. You can pause this video. Okay. Okay, good. So actually this kind of question 7 is actually about the definitions. Describe the difference between the expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy. So what is expansionary fiscal policy? It is increases in government spending or decrease in taxes. And this policy leads to an increase or expansion in the equilibrium level of output. And the contractionary fiscal policy is the reductions in government spending or increases in taxes. This policy leads to a decrease in the equilibrium level of output. And what is the counter-cycle fiscal policy? So there's a lot of things, but you don't need to memorize it. You only need to understand it, okay? Change in the government expanding G or taxes T that moves the economy closer to the full employment level of output Y bar, where the level of output is above a Y bar, and fiscal policy should counter this by carrying out policies that reduce output. If the economy is producing below Y bar, fiscal policy would counter the lower output by enacting the policies that increase output. So this is the figure about the counter-cycle policy. Here, next question. Graphically show that an economy that is in equilibrium at full employment level of output. Imagine that there's an event that causes the aggregate expenditure to decreases, which means the aggregate expenditure shifts left here from the red line to the black line. What should the fiscal policy mix response to the and what do you think one determinant is more important than another? Okay. So here, suppose E star is the full employment equilibrium and Y star is the full employment level. Then when delta G increases is greater than the impact of delta T, then the absolute value, when the absolute value of delta G equals to the absolute value of delta T, it is because that is equal to 1 and negative 1 to be easier. Then we can have 1 minus 1 over 1 minus MPC is larger than MPC over 1 minus MPC. So here is the key. Remember what is this one? This is a coefficient of delta G, right? So now you can get, even though delta G and delta T is the same, then but the coefficient of delta G is larger. Then you can have the impact of delta G is larger than the impact of the change of T. And next question. Today, the economy at the full employment level of GDP and the government has the balanced federal budget. Tomorrow, the government enters a recession. How will the federal budget change? So recession means that the actual outcome is below the full employment level of output, which means counter-cycle fiscal policy would aim to increase equilibrium output, which will cause G government spending increases or the tax decreases. But we know the impact of G is larger than the impact of T, right? So government will be running a budget deficit. And the next question discusses the relationship between the federal deficit and national debt. The national debt is the total amount of money that government owes to the lenders. And government runs a deficit and borrows money to fund their spending. National debt grows. Calculate the change of real GDP would result in each of the following cases. Assume there's no automatic stabilizer. This one is important because only one, everything else are constant. Only one thing changed. Okay. Let's look at this case. Actually, this one is the same with before. So you can stop the video and take a screenshot to make a practice. And all the questions are solved by using method 2 rather than requiring you to solve it step by step. Okay. Again, this one. Okay, so I think that's it for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know.